first of all, the so-called Thucydides Trap is really the idea that a rising power must, by definition, almost come into conflict with the previously dominant power. And of course, history has some examples of this, so you can't entirely dismiss it. But basically, I think that idea ignores two things. One is the very high degree of economic interdependence between China and the United States, and indeed China and its region, even China and Japan. The second thing is diplomacy. I mean, the art of diplomacy is to put conflict into a construct that you can constructively deal with. And I think the Thucydides Trap is almost deterministic, rising powers coming into conflict. But I think the job of diplomacy is to pay sufficient heed to one another's interests that we can avoid conflict. Take the example of President Xi's recent visit. We've been working with the Chinese military to develop what you might call rules of the road, rules of engagement of both our naval forces and our Air Force. And very recently, the United States crossed the 12 nautical mile limit around one of the islands in the Spratly Group. The United States and China had agreed on rules of the road. And in this incident, I fully understand neither side is fully happy with one another, but we both observed the rules that we had negotiated and agreed. And so while it's not a desirable situation, it was a fully manageable situation because through diplomacy, we had agreed on how each side would behave under such circumstances. It's probably best described by pointing to our country's two narratives. The United States would sort of see, since World War II, that we inherited after World War II a world in disorder and economic disarray. And we, along with others, helped construct the United Nations, the Bretton Woods economic organizations, World Bank, IMF, so forth, and then later regional organizations like the Asian Development Bank with the Japanese. I think China's narrative is a little different, and that is that this order that I just described was built when China was not a part of it, and when China was weaker. And so China, by virtue of becoming stronger, is entitled to play a bigger role in these institutions more rapidly, and to have some voice in modifying these institutions and building new institutions like the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, RCEP, kinds of things. China is trying to create not a new order, but a modified order. And so, of course, the United States sees itself having played a role in the pre-existent order and sees China as trying to change it. For the Chinese part, they tend to see U.S. reticence, like opposition to the Asia Infrastructure Bank, or some of our security alliances, to be designed to keep China hemmed in, to limit China's rapid expansion into the international zone. And so I think this is where the friction is. Well, of course, we're all talking about China's slowing growth. But let's remember, this is slowing growth from 11% to 7%, or maybe 6%. That is still the most rapidly growing major economy of the world. So China, even with slower growth, is the biggest single growth story in the world. And so also China's built institutions like the Asia Infrastructure Bank. And so China's not only using its own capital, but increasingly it's able to mobilize the capital of other countries towards objectives of building infrastructure in Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and so forth. So it's possible that China's capacity to do some of these things will slow a bit, but it's one of the two locomotives of the world economy now. So I think it will be very big no matter what reasonable assumptions we make about growth.